The road into the Colorado mountains stretched endlessly ahead of Ethan Parker and Noah Reed as their old SUV climbed higher through winding forest roads. Tall pine trees surrounded both sides of the highway, while soft golden sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. The deeper they drove into the wilderness, the quieter the world seemed to become. No traffic, no loud city noise, no constant phone notifications. Just mountains, forests, and the peaceful feeling of finally escaping normal life for a while. Noah rested one arm casually near the open window, while cool mountain air rushed inside the car. "This already feels better than therapy," he joked. Ethan laughed from the driver's seat. "You say that every time we go camping." "Because every time I'm right." Ethan smiled faintly. That was one thing he loved most about Noah. Everything around him always felt easier somehow. They have been best friends for almost 6 years now. Through college stress, failed relationships, bad jobs, and family problems, Noah had somehow always remained the one constant part of Ethan's life. And this trip had been Noah's idea. A full weekend deep in the wilderness with no distractions. No internet, Noah announced proudly while holding up his dead phone signal. "Nature officially owns us now." That sounds threatening. It should. The two laughed as the SUV finally turned onto a smaller dirt road, leading toward the camping area near the mountains. The deeper they drove, the more beautiful the scenery became. Huge forests stretched endlessly across the hills, while a crystal-clear lake reflected the late afternoon sunlight nearby. Birds circled high above the trees, and the only sounds came from the wind moving softly through the wilderness. "This place is insane," Ethan admitted quietly while parking near the campsite. Noah stepped out immediately, stretching his arms dramatically. "Okay, yeah, we live here now." Ethan shook his head while laughing softly. Together they unpacked the camping gear from the back of the SUV. Setting up the campsite quickly became chaotic because Noah refused to follow instructions properly. "You're putting the tent backward," Ethan pointed out. "No, I'm not. You literally are." Noah stared at the tent for a second before sighing dramatically. "Okay, maybe a little." Ethan laughed harder. The entire afternoon passed comfortably like that. Constant teasing, small jokes, and easy conversation flowing naturally between them. Once the tent was finally standing properly beside the lake, Noah gathered wood for the campfire while Ethan prepared dinner supplies nearby. As sunset slowly spread across the mountains, the entire forest turned shades of orange and gold. The view almost looked unreal. Noah stood beside the fire pit quietly for a second while staring at the lake reflecting the evening sky. "You ever think about just disappearing into places like this forever?" he asked softly. Ethan looked over at him. Noah rarely sounded serious for long. "What, like becoming mountain people?" "I'm serious," Noah replied while smiling faintly. "No bills, no stress. No people." Ethan smirked. "You'd survive maybe 3 days before demanding coffee delivery." "That's fair." Still, Ethan understood what Noah meant. Out here, everything felt calmer. Simpler somehow. Back in the city, life constantly moved too fast. Work deadlines, responsibilities, pressure, loneliness hiding beneath busy routines. But here, surrounded by mountains and endless forest, those problems suddenly felt far away. As darkness slowly arrived, they built a large campfire beside the lake. The crackling flames warmed the cool evening air, while stars slowly began appearing overhead one by one. Dinner turned into another disaster because Noah nearly burned half the food while trying to improve Ethan's cooking. "You are banned from touching anything near fire," Ethan told him. "You're overreacting. The chicken is literally black. It's called flavor." Ethan laughed so hard he almost dropped his plate. By the time they finally finished eating, the night had fully settled across the forest. The lake reflected moonlight softly while crickets echoed through the trees around them. The entire campsite felt peaceful in a way Ethan hadn't experienced in months. The two sat beside the fire quietly for a while, each holding warm drinks while watching sparks rise into the dark sky. For the first time all day, the conversation slowly became calmer, more personal. Noah leaned back against a log near the fire, and sighed softly. I forgot how much I needed this. Ethan nodded slightly. Yeah. Another silence followed. Not awkward. Comfortable. That was the thing about Noah. Silence around him never felt empty. After a few minutes, Noah glanced toward Ethan. You've been stressed lately. Ethan looked slightly surprised. What makes you say that? You get quieter when something's bothering you. The observation caught Ethan off guard because Noah said it so casually, like he'd always paid attention to small details like that. Maybe he had. Ethan stared briefly into the fire before answering honestly. Work's been exhausting. That's not all. Ethan looked up at him. Noah's expression remained soft and calm in the firelight now. For a moment, Ethan considered avoiding the conversation completely. But out here, surrounded by darkness and silence, pretending somehow felt harder. I don't know, Ethan admitted quietly. Sometimes life just feels lonely, I guess. The honesty lingered between them. Noah looked down briefly before speaking softer this time. Yeah, I get that. Something about hearing vulnerability in Noah's voice made Ethan's chest tighten slightly. Because Noah normally hid serious emotions behind jokes and sarcasm. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the isolation of the mountains. Maybe it was the quietness of the forest around them. Or maybe being alone out here together stripped away distractions they usually hid behind back home. The fire crackled softly between them while cold air moved gently through the trees. Noah smiled faintly after a while. You know, this trip might actually fix my mental health. Ethan laughed quietly. One camping trip is not curing your entire personality. Rude, but accurate. Noah grinned again, though this time the expression felt softer somehow. The night continued slowly after that. They stayed beside the fire for hours talking about random memories, old relationships, childhood stories, and future plans neither of them were fully sure about yet. And somewhere, during those quiet conversations beneath the stars, by the time the campfire burned lower, the forest around Ethan and Noah had become almost completely silent. The only sounds left were crickets echoing through the trees, wind moving softly across the lake, and the occasional crackle of burning wood beneath the glowing fire. Above them, the night sky stretched endlessly across the mountains, filled with more stars than either of them had seen in years. Noah leaned back against the log behind him, staring upward quietly. Okay, he muttered softly, this might actually be the prettiest place we've ever camped. Ethan smiled faintly while tossing another small branch into the fire. You say that every trip too, because nature keeps trying to impress me. Ethan laughed under his breath. The warmth of the fire mixed with the cold mountain air perfectly, creating a calm, peaceful feeling that made time seem slower somehow. Neither of them seemed in any hurry to sleep yet. Not tonight. Noah glanced toward Ethan again after a few quiet minutes. You've been thinking about something all night. Ethan looked slightly surprised. What makes you say that? You keep staring into the fire like you're in a movie. That's very judgmental. It's accurate. Ethan shook his head while smiling weakly. But Noah wasn't wrong. His thoughts had been restless ever since sunset. And sitting out here alone in the wilderness beside Noah only made those emotions harder to ignore. Eventually, Noah stood and stretched slightly. I'm freezing. I'm going inside the tent before this mountain air kills me. You're dramatic. You'll miss me when I die. Ethan laughed quietly before following him toward the tent a few moments later. Inside, the small camping lantern hanging near the top of the tent cast a soft golden glow across the narrow space. Blankets and sleeping bags covered most of the floor, while cold air continued pressing softly against the tent walls outside. The small space immediately felt warmer. Closer. Noah zipped the tent shut behind them before dropping down onto the blankets dramatically. I officially live here now. You say that everywhere. Because comfort is important. Ethan sat beside him while pulling one of the blankets over his shoulders. The close quarters inside the tent made every movement suddenly feel more noticeable than usual. Their knees brushed briefly. Neither moved away immediately. For a while, the mood stayed light. They joked about surviving the wilderness, argued over who nearly ruined dinner earlier, and laughed about old college memories they hadn't talked about in years. But eventually, like the fire outside, the energy between them slowly softened into something quieter, more emotional. Noah lay back against his sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of the tent while speaking softly. "You know what I like most about being out here?" Ethan looked over at him. "What?" "No expectations." The answer surprised him slightly. Noah shrugged faintly. "Back home, everything feels exhausting sometimes. Work, people, pretending to always have everything figured out." His voice faded slightly. Ethan stayed quiet, listening carefully. Noah turned his head toward him again. "Out here, it's different." "How?" Noah smiled softly. "I don't know. Feels easier to breathe." The honesty in his voice settled deeply between them. Ethan understood exactly what he meant. Out here, there were no distractions hiding how they truly felt. No crowded city, no constant noise, just the two of them alone beneath endless mountains and darkness. For a moment, neither spoke again. The silence inside the tent felt warm somehow. Safe. Then Noah looked at Ethan carefully and asked softly, "What's been bothering you lately?" Ethan's chest tightened slightly. The question sounded simple, but Noah's voice carried real concern behind it now. Ethan looked down briefly at his hands before answering. "I've just been confused about things." Noah frowned slightly. "What kind of things?" Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him to avoid the truth completely, because once certain feelings were spoken out loud, nothing stayed simple anymore, especially not with someone as important as Noah. But hiding suddenly felt impossible tonight. Not here. Not after hours of honesty between them already. Ethan let out a slow breath before speaking quietly. "Do you ever feel like your life changes without you realizing it?" Noah studied him carefully. "Yeah." Ethan nodded slightly. "And then one day you wake up, and suddenly things that used to feel normal don't anymore." The atmosphere inside the tent shifted almost immediately. Noah sat up slightly now, clearly sensing the deeper meaning behind the words. Ethan looked away briefly before finally admitting the truth. "I think I've been trying to ignore feelings for a long time." The silence afterward felt heavy enough to stop time completely. Noah didn't move, didn't interrupt. Ethan forced himself to continue despite the nervousness tightening painfully in his chest. "And being out here with you," he swallowed nervously, "it's made it harder to pretend those feelings aren't real anymore." Noah stared at him quietly. The lantern light softened his expression while cold wind brushed lightly against the tent outside. For one terrifying second, Ethan thought he'd completely ruined everything. Then Noah finally spoke. "What kind of feelings?" The question came softly. Not angry, not uncomfortable, just honest. Ethan's heartbeat felt impossible to ignore now. "You probably already know." Noah looked down briefly before laughing quietly under his breath. And somehow that reaction confused Ethan even more. "What?" Ethan asked nervously. Noah shook his head slowly. "I thought I was imagining it." Ethan stared at him. "Imagining what?" "This," Noah admitted quietly while looking back at him. "Whatever's been happening between us." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected, because suddenly he realized he hadn't been alone in feeling the tension growing between them. Not even close. Noah rubbed a hand over the back of his neck awkwardly before continuing. "I think part of me noticed this a long time ago." He smiled weakly. "I just kept convincing myself it was easier not to think about it." Ethan felt warmth and fear collide inside his chest all at once. The emotional distance between them suddenly felt gone now, replaced by something far more vulnerable, far more real. Neither of them seemed able to look away anymore. Noah shifted slightly closer beneath the blankets without fully realizing it. Or maybe he did realize. Ethan honestly couldn't tell anymore. Morning arrived slowly over the mountains. Soft sunlight filtered through the thin walls of the tent, while distant birds echoed through the forest outside. The cold night air had faded, replaced by the calm warmth of early morning spreading across the campsite beside the lake. For a few quiet seconds, everything felt peaceful. Then reality returned. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, memories from the night before rushing back almost instantly. The emotional conversation, Noah's confession, the closeness between them that had changed everything. His chest tightened immediately. Beside him, Noah was already awake, sitting quietly near the tent entrance, looking out toward the lake. Something about his expression felt different now, more distant. Ethan sat up carefully beneath the blankets. "Morning." Noah glanced back briefly before giving a small nod. "Morning." The awkwardness in his voice appeared immediately, and Ethan noticed it instantly. The silence between them no longer felt warm and comforting like last night. Now it felt uncertain, fragile. Neither seemed fully sure how to act around each other anymore. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face while trying to calm the nervousness building in his chest. Everything had felt so honest in the darkness last night, so real. But daylight somehow made emotions feel more complicated. Noah unzipped the tent halfway, letting cool morning air drift inside. "I'm gonna make coffee." "Okay." That single word was all Ethan managed to say before Noah stepped outside. The second he disappeared, Ethan leaned back against the blankets and closed his eyes briefly. Fear slowly settled inside him now. Not fear of his feelings anymore. Fear of losing Noah completely. Because suddenly every possibility felt dangerous. If things between them failed, their friendship could collapse too. And Ethan honestly didn't know who he would be without Noah in his life. Outside, he could hear Noah moving around near the campfire pit while water heated over the small camping stove. Normally, mornings between them felt effortless. Constant jokes, teasing, easy conversation. Today, the silence felt heavy instead. When Ethan finally stepped outside the tent a few minutes later, the atmosphere around the campsite already felt different. Noah stood beside the fire holding 2 coffee mugs while staring quietly at the lake. The mountains reflected beautifully across the water beneath the bright morning sky. But neither of them seemed able to fully enjoy the view now. Ethan walked closer slowly. "Thanks." Noah handed him one of the mugs carefully. Their fingers brushed briefly. Both immediately noticed it, and both looked away afterward. That hurt more than Ethan expected. For a while, they sat quietly beside the fire, sipping coffee, while birds moved through the trees overhead. Finally, Noah spoke. "So?" Ethan looked toward him. Noah stared down into his mug before continuing quietly. "Last night was a lot." Ethan's chest tightened. "Yeah," he admitted softly. Another silence followed. Noah rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I barely slept." "Me neither." The tension between them kept growing stronger the longer they avoided saying what they were both truly thinking. Eventually, Noah sighed quietly. "I don't know what happens now." The honesty in his voice felt painfully vulnerable. Ethan looked toward the forest briefly before answering. "I don't either." And that was the truth. Because neither of them had planned for this. For years, their friendship had existed inside safe boundaries neither dared cross. Now, those boundaries were gone. And suddenly the future between them felt terrifyingly uncertain. The rest of the morning passed awkwardly. They packed supplies for a hiking trail deeper into the mountains. But even normal conversations fell harder now. Every small moment carried emotional weight behind it. Every glance felt too meaningful. At one point, Noah nearly dropped the backpack while distracted, and Ethan instinctively reached out to steady him. The brief touch froze both of them instantly. Noah pulled away first. Not harshly, just nervously. And Ethan felt disappointment settle heavily inside his chest. The hike through the forest started quietly. Tall pine trees surrounded the narrow trail, while sunlight filtered softly through the branches overhead. Normally, Noah would have spent the entire hike joking nonstop. Today, he stayed mostly quiet. Ethan kept noticing him drifting into his own thoughts while walking ahead. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of silence, Ethan spoke carefully. "Are you regretting this?" Noah stopped walking immediately. The question hung heavily between them. "What?" Noah asked softly. Ethan looked down briefly before continuing. "Everything from last night." Noah stared at him for several seconds before answering honestly. "No." The answer came quickly enough to sound real. But something still felt wrong. "Then why are you acting like this?" Ethan asked quietly. Noah exhaled sharply before running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Because I'm trying to understand what this means." The emotion in his voice surprised Ethan slightly. Noah rarely sounded overwhelmed, but now confusion and fear were written clearly across his face. "We've been best friends for years," Noah continued quietly. "And suddenly one conversation changes everything." Ethan stepped closer slowly. "Maybe it doesn't have to ruin anything." "You don't know that." The sentence came out sharper than Noah intended. Instantly regret crossed his face afterward, but the damage was already done. Ethan looked away toward the trees, hurt settling visibly in his expression now. Noah sighed heavily. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Noah struggled to answer immediately, because deep down, he wasn't afraid of Ethan. He was afraid of how much Ethan mattered to him now. "I'm scared," Noah admitted finally. The honesty softened Ethan's frustration instantly. Noah looked exhausted emotionally as he continued speaking. "I spent years thinking our friendship was the safest thing in my life." He laughed weakly under his breath. "Now suddenly I'm terrified of losing it." Ethan felt the same fear every second since sunrise. But hearing Noah say it out loud somehow made it more real. They continued, walking quietly until eventually reaching the lake deeper inside the forest. The water shimmered beneath the afternoon sunlight, while mountains surrounded the area completely. Usually the view would have amazed them both. Today, the emotional tension between them overshadowed everything else. By the time Ethan and Noah returned to the campsite, evening had already begun settling across the mountains again. The sky above the lake slowly turned shades of orange and deep blue, while cold wind moved softly through the trees surrounding their small camp. Neither of them spoke much during the walk back. Not because they were angry anymore, because both were emotionally exhausted. The conversations near the lake earlier had forced them to finally confront feelings they had buried for years, and now everything between them felt fragile in a completely different way. Ethan quietly unpacked supplies near the tent, while Noah rebuilt the campfire nearby. The silence between them no longer felt hostile, just uncertain. At one point, Ethan glanced toward Noah through the fading sunlight and noticed how tired he looked. Not physically, emotionally. That realization hurt more than anything else, because Ethan knew he looked the same. Eventually, the fire crackled softly beneath the darkening sky, while shadows stretched across the forest around them. Noah sat alone near the flames, staring down quietly at the burning wood, while sparks drifted upward into the night air. Ethan watched him silently for several moments from near the tent, then finally walked over and sat beside him. Neither spoke at first. The warmth of the fire mixed with the cold mountain air, while distant water moved softly against the shoreline nearby. Above them, stars slowly began appearing again across the sky. After a long silence, Noah finally exhaled quietly. "I hate this." Ethan looked toward him carefully. "What part?" Noah laughed weakly under his breath. "The part where I suddenly don't know how to act around the person I trust most." The honesty in his voice immediately softened something inside Ethan. Noah rubbed his hands together slowly before continuing. "Last night felt so clear." He stared into the fire. And then morning came, and suddenly everything felt terrifying. Ethan nodded slightly. "Yeah." Noah looked over at him finally. "I'm sorry for pulling away today." "You don't need to apologize." "I do." His voice carried genuine guilt now. Ethan stayed quiet while Noah searched for the right words. Finally, Noah admitted softly, "I think I spent so many years pretending certain feelings didn't exist that once they became real, I panicked." The sentence settled heavily between them. Ethan understood completely, because he'd felt the exact same fear all day too. Noah leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows against his knees while speaking quietly into the firelight. "You're the one person I never wanted to lose." Ethan's chest tightened immediately hearing that. "For years," Noah continued, "our friendship was the safest thing in my life. No matter how bad things got, I always knew you'd still be there." His voice softened further. "And now I'm scared that if we do this wrong, I ruin the best relationship I've ever had." Ethan looked down briefly, emotions building heavily inside him now. The fear between them suddenly felt painfully mutual. Neither was afraid because the feelings weren't real. They were afraid because the feelings mattered too much. Ethan stared quietly at the fire for several seconds before finally speaking honestly. You know what I realized today? Noah looked toward him. I'd rather deal with confusion and uncertainty than spend the rest of my life pretending I don't feel this way about you. The vulnerability in Ethan's voice made Noah freeze slightly. Ethan forced himself to continue despite the nervousness in his chest. Maybe this changes everything between us, he admitted quietly. But honestly, things already changed a long time ago. Noah's expression softened completely now, because deep down, he knew Ethan was right. Their connection had been growing beyond friendship for years without either of them fully admitting it aloud. The camping trip hadn't created those feelings. It had only exposed them. Outside the firelight, the forest remained completely silent around them. No distractions, no noise, just honesty. Noah smiled faintly after a long pause. You know, we're really bad at emotional stability. Ethan laughed softly for the first time all day. Terrible, honestly. That small moment of laughter immediately eased some of the heaviness between them. Not perfectly, but enough. Noah looked at him carefully again afterward, his expression calmer now. I don't want fear deciding this for us. Ethan's heartbeat quickened slightly. Noah continued softly. I don't have every answer yet. I don't know what happens once we go home. I don't know how complicated this gets. He paused briefly before adding, but I know I don't want to walk away from you. The words settled deeply inside Ethan. For the first time since morning, the fear inside his chest finally loosened slightly. Because no matter how uncertain things still felt, one truth remained clear now. Neither of them wanted to lose the other. Ethan smiled softly. That's enough for me right now. Noah stared at him quietly for a second before laughing under his breath again. We really came into these mountains as emotionally stable best friends and somehow turned into a disaster. A beautiful disaster, Ethan replied. That's painfully cheesy, but accurate. Noah shook his head while smiling properly again for the first time all day. And seeing that smile immediately made the entire trip feel lighter somehow. The tension between them slowly faded after that conversation, not disappearing completely, but transforming into something calmer, something honest. Later that night, they stayed beside the fire, talking quietly beneath the stars for hours, no longer avoiding difficult conversations. This time, neither pretended not to care. They spoke honestly about fear, relationships, loneliness, and the years of hidden emotions neither had fully understood until now. And somewhere during those conversations, both realized something important. They didn't need every answer immediately. They didn't need labels or promises yet. They only needed honesty. By morning, sunlight once again filled the campsite while cold air drifted gently across the mountains. But this time everything felt different, lighter. Noah stood beside the SUV packing equipment while Ethan folded blankets near the tent. At one point, Noah glanced toward him and smiled softly. Not awkwardly, naturally, like something between them had finally settled into place. Ethan walked over beside him while the mountains glowed beneath the early morning sunlight.